Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to Darth Matu's Holocron. I know, it's been a while since I dipped into Star Wars, but listen, Star Wars is where I was born. I may wander far from home, but I always come back. I have my next History of the Force video in the works. Those things always take forever. But to keep you held over until then, I wanted to explore a little looked at corner of the Star Wars galaxy. A place deep within the unknown regions, and home to an absolute darkness, an evil so potent that it defies explanation. Today, we are going to be discussing the Sorcerers of Rhand.
New claimants to the dark side tradition have arisen from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The most enigmatic of the new competitors are the Sorcerers of Rhand. They claim a kinship with the dark, which they view as the embodiment of death and decay. A true sorcerer is said to be able to use a psychic blast to eradicate an object or living being.
The Book of Sith on the Sorcerers of Rhand. This passage in the Book of Sith refers to the sorcerers as newcomers, but this is very far from the truth. In actuality, no one knows how long the sorcerers have existed, though it has surely been many millennia. Most of the information that we have on the sorcerers was not gained until around 80 BBY, when a chronicler from Karavar named Sukati met with the sorcerers. Indeed, the sorcerers are extremely reclusive. They have never been sighted beyond the Paran Nebula, a red, hazardous cloud of interstellar gas that shields the 12 worlds that the sorcerers control. These 12 worlds are known as the Nihil Retreat, and it is one of the most secretive areas of the galaxy. Sukati was the first person recorded to have entered the Paran Nebula and returned alive, and the information she gathered there is what gives us window into the nature of the sorcerers. The first thing that Sukati tells us about the sorcerers is that their nature is intrinsically unknowable. She describes a meeting with figures that could not have been from any planet in the galaxy. One was a living, blackened skeleton. Another lacked skin, oozing bodily fluids at a constant rate. One appeared to have been turned inside out, and still another existed as a ribbon of flesh which moved constantly throughout the chamber. Sukati was unable to determine whether these beings have become corrupted, whether their appearances were illusions, or indeed if they were some kind of eldritch, supernatural creatures. Whatever the sorcerers are, Sukati had never met their like, nor would she ever see anything similar again. The sorcerers did share knowledge with Sukati, however, knowledge about their history and views on the universe. Sukati was never told the reasoning for this unprecedented opening up of a usually airtight society, but she gladly chronicled their story. She claimed that the sorcerers were the result of a merging between 3 distinct death cults which existed within the unknown regions. The first such cult was the Knell of Muspili, a death cult that formed within the Gunaga Gap within the unknown regions. The Gap was home to a spatial fissure that was hardly understood by scientists. The Knell of Muspili believed that beyond this fissure lay apocalyptic deities, and they transcribed a work that was known as the Taranic Codex in an attempt to call these deities forth into the wider galaxy. Lord Chronal, an acolyte of Palpatine's who threatened the fledgling New Republic, sought out fragments of the Codex in an effort to master the teachings of the sorcerers. The Knell would eventually come into contact with another group, the Warriors of Shadow, the second of the 3 cults that would eventually form the Sorcerers of Rhand. The Warriors of Shadow were Tong, the species that would eventually form the Mandalorian culture. They were a matriarchal organization, and they left for the unknown regions after the Zell had driven the Tong from their original homeworld of Coruscant. They sought to redeem themselves for this failure through meditation and insight. They would come into open conflict against the Nella Muspili, but over thousands of years, the two groups would merge together, their independent philosophies blurring even as the Taranic Codex was destroyed. The third and final cult that would come to form the Sorcerers of Rhand was the Kanzar Exiles. The Exiles were fanatically religious, though the exact details of their faith is a little unclear. We know that they had enormous power for an organization of their size, at one point even constructing a planet-sized temple. We also know that the method they preferred to expand the reach of their faith was mind control. The Kanzar Exiles claimed to be able to puppet others at a whim or subtly influence them through subconscious suggestion. The blending of these three groups took place again over the course of thousands of years, and while the exact details of much of their original beliefs have been lost to time, we can infer much based on the philosophy of the Sorcerers of Rhand. The Sorcerers are Force sensitives who decry the Force itself. They believe that the light side and the dark side are, in the end, simply paltry things, and they see their own practices as wholly separate from the Force itself. They call the power that they call upon the dark, and they believe that it is the end of all things, and thus the only true power in the universe. The dark is the concept of entropy, the personification of the idea that things will always fall apart. The sorcerers believe that because the mightiest of nations and heroes, the most enduring of monuments, even the stars themselves eventually die, that all of these things are artificial and temporary, not at all the benchmark of true reality. The dark is true reality to the Sorcerers of Rhand, the void from which all things temporarily spring, and the ubiquitous nothing that all things shall return to. Sorcerers view those who work for a legacy, to build nations, to better themselves as foolish, short-sighted children, their effort doomed to vanish forever. The sorcerers focus on the act of destruction. To them, the dark is exemplified as a double-sided coin, destruction on one side, time on the other. The sorcerers see that violent and destructive acts, combined with the passage of time, have more potential to change the universe than an act of creation. The destruction of Alderaan rippled for generations, for example, while the fledgling New Republic that was built in the wake of the Empire's defeat didn't even last a single lifetime. This long view on manipulating the forces of annihilation brings with it a potent ability. The sorcerers are able to view the fullness of time, to look forward and backward along its flow and spot the currents of entropy. They can view branching alternate pathways in the universe based upon which path is more or less destructive, giving them a clarity of vision and foresight that is rarely rivaled elsewhere. The sorcerers see it as their duty to manipulate events towards the most entropic end, to steer the universe towards its inevitable heat death. This ability to peer through the currents of time is known as the dark sight, and it is a technique that was even envied by Darth Sidious himself. The Sorcerers of Rhand have even refined the dark sight into their own form of battle meditation. They are able to view a battlefield and sense the tide of death, detecting those closest to it and then influencing them to make decisions which lead directly to their end. The sorcerers are also able to summon the dark into a physical manifestation which they can then hurl at enemies. This technique is known as the Dark Shear, and those struck by such a blast suffer years of entropy at once. Armor rusts and becomes brittle, power cells drain, and organic flesh ages, growing decrepit and old. These effects can sometimes be reversed with Bacta, but this often appears to be very hit or miss, with some of those affected by the Darkshear forced to replace entropic limbs with prosthetics. The sorcerers also view their own mortal forms as temporary constructs meant to be destroyed by the dark. They give up connection to their physical bodies, and instead try to connect their consciousness directly to the dark. The most powerful adepts are believed to be able to join with the dark once their mortal form fully decays, becoming an eldritch being of shadow capable of consuming the stars. This process may explain the supernatural appearance of the beings that Sukati met with. Perhaps the closer one connects to the dark, the more twisted and unnatural one's form becomes. This process has echoes in the physical corruption that comes from utilizing the dark side, but it goes far beyond anything seen in even the most powerful Sith. The truth is that the nature of the horrifying appearance that the sorcerers take on is unknown, and everything I just said is speculation. The methods used by the sorcerers, however, do not just have a physical toll. They do seem to come with a spiritual one as well, with the presence of those who follow the dark described as being like a black hole in the Force, a void which devours everything around it. Chronal and Lord Shadowspawn both are described this way, as is Palpatine, who utilized some of the sorcerer's techniques to supplement his own power. The sorcerers have a final unique attribute to them, a process which speaks to a kind of internal alchemy which must be akin to the kind used by the Sith, yet wholly different. The sorcerers utilize a substance known as smokestone to directly control others. Smokestone is a mineral natural to the Nihil retreat, and the sorcerers weave it into metallic tattoos, cybernetic implants, or wearable harnesses, which they then use to mark their slaves. These slaves can then be puppeted without resistance, provided the sorcerer is wearing their own smokestone crown. The truth about how smokestone works is unknown, but it allows a sorcerer to share the sensory input of all of their thralls, influence their personalities through primal commands like kill or sleep, or even outright puppet them. How exactly smokestone devices are made is also unknown. Like I said, it could be a form of alchemy, which would make sense considering their potency in the Force, but the sorcerers are also rumored to possess Rakatan forges, which could be capable of creating things, or perhaps it's some lost knowledge which was once contained within the Taranic Codex, some technique that was given to the former Nella Muspili by eldritch apocalyptic beings. Only the sorcerers truly know, and they did not seem to be willing to pass that knowledge on to Sukati. This, sadly, is just about everything we know about the Sorcerers of Rhand. I really recommend that you folks check out Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor if you would like to see some of these guys in action. Lord Chronal and Shadowspawn are the main antagonists in that work. Chronal was an acolyte of Palpatine who supplemented Sith teaching with the philosophy of the Sorcerers of Rhand, and because of that, he became an extreme threat to the early New Republic. It's a great EU novel, it's a one-off, and I really think you guys will enjoy it. It's also implied that Darth Nihilus in Knights of the Old Republic 2 was taught the philosophy of the Sorcerers of Rhand. He is described much the way the sorcerers are, physically speaking, with his mortal form degrading into an eldritch one that is ultimately bound to his mask. It's extremely likely that the Traeus Academy on Malachor contained hidden knowledge on the sorcerers, knowledge that Kreia pushed Nihilus towards. Overall, the Sorcerers of Rhand are one of the most mysterious groups in Star Wars, wholly separate from the normal struggle between light and dark that we normally witness in these stories, perhaps even a worse threat than any posed by the Sith. Whether they are supernatural beings or dark side adherents who developed unique techniques, The only thing protecting the galaxy from destruction is their seeming unwillingness to leave the Paran Nebula. Perhaps, one day, their desire for isolationism will end, and if that day comes, then the galaxy will quake in fear. But alright guys, that's all I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this look at one of the most esoteric corners of the Star Wars universe. I love these little hidden spots of lore myself. If you made it this far, please leave a like and subscribe. It's extremely helpful to the channel. Keep an eye out for my History of the Force, Rise of the Rebellion video coming out soon. And until then, take care of yourselves, everyone. Be well out there, and as always, may the Force break your chains.